Dave.
Hi, Anne. It's Dave Reeder. I just want to say how much I enjoyed your presentation. And when I was thinking about the self-centeredness of the touchscreen, I was thinking about some work I've done with conductive paint, which you can just paint all over the walls and then connect to a capacitive touch sensor, which is basically what those screens are.
Right.
And to me, that's a great way to kind of get away from that self-centeredness you were talking about. If you've, yeah. So I just want to mention that.
Yeah, thanks. No, there's all kinds of good stuff happening, but you know, how easy is it to get hold of that paint and to use it? You know, so more of that, David.
Yeah.
Yeah, thanks.
Hi, Anne. How are you? John Schilb.
Hi, John Schilb. How are you?
Hi. It was great to have you in person here a few years ago.
Yeah.
It's too bad we can't have you in person here today.
Yeah.
This is, well, here's a question. I'm old enough to remember, I suspect you are too, when at the height of theorizing about post-structuralism, there were a number of feminist theorists and critics who said, in so many words, gosh, just when we get to have a self, now, you know,
right.
We're post-structuralist.
Right.
And I wonder what your thoughts are imagining somebody saying, just when we get to think of ourselves more, now we're being attacked for an ontology of profound self-centeredness. In other words, maybe putting the question in a little bit differently, in moving beyond that and to the kind of haptic ontology you're talking about, what do we do with, how do we account for, what simply do we do with the fact that people have had very different histories of relationship toward their ability to be self-centered at all?
I remember well that moment and that specific piece in Feminists Theorize the Political, and feeling trapped, you know, tripped up by it. That one of, you know, wait, we need to be claiming selves and you're telling us we can't be selves. And I take your point that people who are seeking, say, to have political self-representation, if I'm understanding your question, so tell me if I'm getting it wrong, who, you know, are seeking political self-representation now are being told, wait, you're supposed to sort of dissolve into matter. This is an issue with, you know, the more non-human kinds of new materialisms that I mentioned up front. But it's not as though this is a monolithic set of theorizing, right? I mean, all of this stuff happens slowly in all kinds of different parallels. And it's those places in between all these differing levels and trajectories of theorizing that we see possibilities for other actions. So it's not like I'm sitting here before you today saying, here we go, this is what it should be. It's here's something else throwing into the mix. We're always looking from different scales, seeing different possibilities for agency. So I see this kind of thinking as needing to be addressed, but it's in parallel with what you're laying out, that any epistemology or ontology is always going to be limited, right, by who's offering it. And so there needs to be the continual eruption of the multiple, I would say. Does that help? Does that make sense?
Oh, sure. I realize I saddled you with a really difficult question, and your willingness to think through it at all is terrific. I can't help but think that in regard to your specific subject today, it's in exploring greater possibilities for remaking touch.
Yes.
running with that and trying to connect it to the histories we've just been alluding to, it might be we never want to lose sight of the question, and we never want to stop thinking about the question, who historically has been able to touch whom and to what effect. And given particularly, one can't help think, certainly on our campus and others, the whole issue of sexual assault, it raises all sorts of histories about who gets to touch whom. And I know that you wrestle with those issues as well, but that's keeping that question alive is one way of, not forgetting the histories of power differentials.
Yeah, but also, I mean, what I want to add to that is not just who gets to touch whom, but how do we understand touch? In preparing for this, I've got a huge stack of the histories and cultures of touch stuff that I've been reading through. And there are very different understandings of touch at work in other places and other times that we need to keep in mind as well when we're doing this, to keep us humble about what we claim at any time, right? So yeah, who gets to touch whom? But let's stop thinking of touch as anything monolithic also, in the way that we tend to think of sight as being monolithic. Yeah?
Are there any other questions? Yeah.
So, again, thanks very much for your presentations. And hey, Anne, this is Kathy Yancey. Hi.
I can see you there, Kathy. Hi.
Hi. So I'm going to ask a thought experiment question for all the panelists. So reading across your three presentations, one through line for me seemed to be relationships. Now you're stipulating different relationships, and I think the relationships are doing different kinds of work or have different kinds of meaning. But I wonder if you could comment on that at all with specific reference to how or what that tells us about digital rhetoric specifically. And in advance, thanks.
Since I can't see the other panelists, I don't know if they're standing up to talk here. Oh, good.
Oh,
you go.
I think in many ways that's what I found interesting about attention and how you treat it. And if you see it as something that's emergent or something that's an effect, I mean, the opening move I made was thinking like, how do we work with technology as opposed to seeing something that's sort of work against? And so I think shifting how we see what attention is changes the relationship we can have with a technology. I think seeing it as either attention or distraction, it's almost kind of an antagonistic relationship with it. And if you see attention as something that emerges between you, then I think you can see that relationship as potentially more productive or more fruitful or inventional. So that's sort of how I would see a relation there.
Isn't it also that you're asking students to develop a different relationship with place?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and then geocaching in particular uses technology. Then you relate to technology in order to then create additional relationships beyond that.
Okay, and I'll continue real quick. I think for me, what I'm calling cyber history or history used as a guide to analyze historical precedents is really about breaking down any barriers that would traditionally, through classical rhetoric, be placed between ourselves and the object of study, so that yourself as a practicing individual who's making things can start to get in there and get messy with the objects. And I always like to think that those new relationships that I think a lot of us are proposing are supplemental to hermeneutics. They're supplemental to the separation of the object of study from the person who's doing the study, because we get a lot of things out of that kind of work that I think we need to maintain. But those relationships always put up these kind of barriers to the kinds of thought that are considered okay or relevant for research. And I think we really they're very limiting and we need to get around it. So cyber history is one way to conduct historical research that directly affects the present, also without necessarily completely muddling up discussion of the past historically.
And if I can just throw in real quickly to add on those two really smart responses to your question, Kathy. Rhetoric has always been digital and non-digital relational, right? I mean, we teach that to compose a text is compose a relationship with your audience through the text, and vice versa. And I think what we're all asking for now is to understand that we're also performing in all of that relations with the material, within the materials we're using, so that the relationality simply needs to flow out more, our understandings of it, and to be thinking about the consequences outward as well as back inwards in that consubstantiation.
Other questions? Okay, well, okay, Kevin, yeah.
Sorry to delay things with one last question. This is for Nathaniel. I'd love to hear your thoughts on cache in terms of digital environments and not so much the sort of physical component of the geocache. Because I was thinking about how attentions form, let's say with like web browser caches, which are preserving data, from previous visits and experiences. So how could our understanding of attention formation potentially change if we're not thinking about this sort of shared search for the geocache item as the sort of activity or the notion of forming attention within that context, but thinking about how caches can work to potentially slow down attention for the formation of attention if what we're getting is access to information that maybe we're not looking for, but it's being preserved from prior visits or seeking out information or whatnot.
Yeah, I mean that when you go to type in something and it tries to guess what you want, it's like that's not what I wanted, and then you yell at it for a little bit, like I don't want to go to the Noun Project again. I mean it's a great website, but it's not the only thing I want to do. I guess there's a sense in which, yeah, and this could even go this sort of extend to caches, and I think also just like several of the presentation about algorithms and the way that your work with those, I think can sort of shape your attention. But certainly the way that the cache might remind you of things you'd previously sort of attended to. So there's this constant reminder of what you once were interested in. Like you pull up a website, I haven't been there in a while. But I don't know if that necessarily answers your question, but there's a kind of the way that it's sort of, and caches do this too. There's logs of previous visitors, and you can go check those, and because sometimes they'll help you, like they'll say like my child was with me, and it really helped. So like okay, then I know that it's if I get it on my knees, I'll probably find it because a 3-year-old found it before. But I wonder, yeah, just the way that it compiles that, and then that each time it compiles something, that then changes the interaction you have with it. And so I think, right, it might be a slow kind of attention formation that you have with your browser over the period of a year until you finally decide I probably should clear this, and and then you kind of start over. I guess you have refresh the relationship you have with your browser.
Anything else? All right, let's thank our speakers again. Thanks, Anne.
Oh, thank you all. Thanks for your patience.